Dawn of Civilizations, the Land of Canaan. The land we now call Palestine has a history stretching back into the mists of prehistoric times. By 3000 BCE, during the early Bronze Age, vibrant civilizations had already taken root in this fertile crescent. These early societies developed agriculture, built fortified towns, and engaged in rudimentary forms of trade with neighboring regions. Archaeological evidence points to a network of small urban centers, each with its own local administration and cultural practices. Life was intrinsically linked to the land, with seasons dictating the rhythms of planting and harvest. This period laid the foundational layer of human settlement and societal organization in a region that would become a crossroads for empires and cultures for millennia to come, shaping its unique and complex heritage. Among the earliest known inhabitants of this ancient land were the Canaanites. They were a Semitic-speaking people who established a collection of independent city-states across the region. These city-states, such as Jericho, Megiddo, and Gezer, flourished through agriculture and extensive trade networks that connected them with Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Aegean world. The Canaanites developed their own distinct culture, including religious beliefs centered around a pantheon of gods and goddesses, and a script that was one of the earliest alphabetic writing systems. Their societal structure was typically hierarchical, with kings or local chieftains ruling over populations of farmers, artisans, and merchants, creating a complex social tapestry. The powerful Egyptian New Kingdom, flourishing between 1550 and 1077 BCE, exerted significant influence and at times direct control over Canaan. Egyptian pharaohs viewed Canaan as a strategic buffer zone and a vital trade corridor. Military campaigns were launched to secure Egyptian dominance, and Egyptian garrisons were established in key Canaanite cities. This period of Egyptian hegemony led to a considerable cultural exchange. Egyptian art, architecture, and administrative practices permeated Canaanite society, while Canaanite goods and even deities found their way into Egypt. The relationship was often one of vassalage, with Canaanite rulers paying tribute to the Egyptian pharaohs, a dynamic that shaped local politics and power structures. Life for the ordinary Canaanite during this era was deeply intertwined with agricultural cycles and the demands of their local rulers and distant Egyptian overlords. They cultivated wheat, barley, olives, and grapes, and raised livestock. Artisans produced pottery, textiles, and metalwork, some of which became prized trade goods. Religious practices were an integral part of daily existence, with rituals and offerings made to ensure fertility, good harvests, and protection from misfortune. The constant interplay of local traditions with Egyptian influences created a dynamic cultural environment. The legacy of the Canaanites is profound, as their language, culture, and settlements formed the bedrock upon which subsequent civilizations in Palestine would build their own histories. New arrivals and kingdoms, Philistines and Israelites. Around the 12th century BCE, a new group of people known as the Philistines began to settle along the southern coastal plain of Canaan. Historians widely believe the Philistines were part of the Sea Peoples, a confederation of seafaring groups who migrated and raided across the eastern Mediterranean during the late Bronze Age collapse. They established a pentapolis, a league of 5 major city-states: Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, Gath, and Gaza. The Philistines brought with them advanced ironworking technology, which gave them a military advantage over their neighbors. Their distinct pottery, architecture, and burial practices also differentiate them archaeologically from the Canaanite populations, indicating a unique cultural identity that they maintained for centuries. Contemporaneously with the Philistine settlement, another Semitic group, the Israelites, began to consolidate their presence in the central highlands of Canaan. According to biblical traditions, the Israelites emerged as a confederation of tribes who eventually formed monarchies. The establishment of the kingdoms of Israel in the north and Judah in the south marked a significant political development in the region. These kingdoms developed their own religious and cultural traditions, centered on the worship of Yahweh. The period saw the construction of significant urban centers, including Jerusalem, which became the capital of Judah and a focal point for religious life. The relationship between the Israelites and the Philistines was often one of conflict, as both groups vied for land and resources. The name Palestine itself is etymologically linked to the Philistines. The ancient Egyptians referred to them as Peliset, and the Assyrians later called the region Palashtu or Pilistu. This nomenclature, derived from one of the prominent groups inhabiting the coastal areas, gradually came to refer to a larger geographical area over subsequent centuries, eventually being adopted by Greek writers like Herodotus. The Philistines maintained a distinct material culture, influenced by Aegean traditions, and were known for their maritime activities and sophisticated urban organization. Their interactions with the Israelites, Canaanites, and other neighboring peoples were complex, involving periods of warfare, trade, and cultural exchange, profoundly shaping the demographic and political landscape. During this Iron Age, both the Philistine city-states and the Israelite kingdoms experienced periods of growth and consolidation, but also faced internal divisions and external threats. The Kingdom of Israel, with its capital in Samaria, was generally more prosperous and populous than Judah due to its fertile lands and strategic trade routes. However, it was also more exposed to the ambitions of rising empires in Mesopotamia. The Kingdom of Judah, centered around Jerusalem, was more isolated geographically, but developed a strong religious and national identity. The historical and religious narratives developed during this era, particularly those associated with the Israelites, would have a lasting impact on the future religious and cultural identity of the land and its diverse inhabitants. Empires ascendant: Assyrians, Babylonians, and Persians. The relative autonomy of the local kingdoms in Palestine came under severe pressure with the rise of powerful Mesopotamian empires. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, known for its military prowess and brutal tactics, began its westward expansion in the 8th century BCE. The northern kingdom of Israel fell to the Assyrians around 722 BCE. Its capital Samaria was conquered, and a significant portion of its population was deported, a common Assyrian policy to quell resistance and integrate conquered territories. The Kingdom of Judah managed to survive this period, often as a vassal state paying heavy tribute to the Assyrian monarchs. This era marked a significant turning point, demonstrating the increasing vulnerability of smaller states in the face of large centralized empires. The Assyrian dominance eventually gave way to the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Under King Nebuchadnezzar II, the Babylonians asserted their control over the Levant. The Kingdom of Judah, after a series of rebellions, faced a devastating conquest. In 586 BCE, Jerusalem was besieged and captured, Solomon's temple was destroyed, and a significant portion of Judah's elite, including religious leaders and skilled artisans, were exiled to Babylon. This event, known as the Babylonian captivity, was a traumatic experience for the Jewish people, profoundly shaping their religious thought and identity. The land of Judah became a Babylonian province, its economy disrupted and its social fabric torn. A new imperial power, the Achaemenid Persian Empire, emerged under Cyrus the Great, conquering Babylon in 539 BCE. The Persian approach to governance was generally more tolerant than that of their Assyrian and Babylonian predecessors. Cyrus issued a decree allowing exiled peoples, including the Jews in Babylon, to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples. This policy facilitated the return of many Jewish exiles to Judah, then known as Yehud Medinata, a province within the Persian Empire. Under Persian patronage, the Second Temple in Jerusalem was completed around 516 BCE, becoming once again the center of Jewish religious life and fostering a period of religious and communal renewal. During Persian rule, which lasted for about 2 centuries, Palestine experienced a period of relative peace and stability. The Persians organized their vast empire into satrapies or provinces, each governed by a satrap. Yehud was a small administrative unit within a larger satrapy. Aramaic became the lingua franca of the empire, widely used in administration and commerce throughout the region, including Palestine. The local population, a mix of returning exiles and those who had remained, engaged in agriculture and trade. While politically subservient to a distant imperial power, communities were often allowed a degree of local autonomy in managing their internal affairs, particularly religious matters, which allowed for the consolidation of Jewish religious law and practice. Hellenistic Age and Roman dominions. The Persian era concluded dramatically with the conquests of Alexander the Great of Macedon. In 332 BCE, Alexander swept through the Levant, defeating the Persian forces and incorporating Palestine into his rapidly expanding empire. This conquest heralded the beginning of the Hellenistic period, characterized by the spread of Greek language, culture, and ideas throughout the eastern Mediterranean. After Alexander's early death, his vast empire was divided among his generals, the Diadochi. Palestine became a contested territory, frequently changing hands between the Ptolemaic kingdom based in Egypt and the Seleucid Empire centered in Syria. This ongoing rivalry brought both instability and further Greek influence to the region. Hellenistic influence manifested in various ways across Palestine. Greek became a language of administration and commerce, alongside Aramaic and Hebrew. New cities were founded on Greek models, and existing ones were Hellenized, adopting Greek institutions like the gymnasium and theater. While some segments of the local population, particularly urban elites, embraced Hellenistic culture, others resisted its encroachment, viewing it as a threat to their traditional customs and religious practices. This tension was particularly acute among some Jewish communities who sought to preserve their unique religious and cultural identity in the face of pervasive Hellenistic norms, leading to internal divisions and occasional friction with Hellenizing rulers. By 63 BCE, the expanding Roman Republic, under the general Pompey the Great, annexed Palestine, bringing an end to Hellenistic rule and ushering in centuries of Roman domination. Initially, Rome governed through local client kings such as Herod the Great, who undertook massive construction projects, including the lavish rebuilding of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. However, Roman rule became increasingly direct and often oppressive, with heavy taxation and a disregard for local sensitivities. This led to widespread discontent among the Jewish population, fueling messianic expectations and a growing desire for independence from Roman control, setting the stage for significant upheavals. The simmering resentment against Roman rule erupted into several major Jewish revolts. The Great Revolt from 66 to 73 AD was a widespread uprising that was brutally suppressed by the Roman legions. A pivotal and tragic moment of this conflict was the siege of Jerusalem and the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD by Titus. This event had a cataclysmic impact on Jewish society, leading to the end of sacrificial worship and a shift towards rabbinic Judaism. Decades later, the Bar Kokhba revolt from 132 to 136 AD, another desperate attempt to throw off Roman rule, also ended in a crushing defeat. Following this revolt, Emperor Hadrian expelled Jews from Jerusalem, renamed the city Aelia Capitolina, and renamed the province Syria Palestina, further attempting to erase Jewish connections to the land. Section 5, Byzantium and the Rise of Islam, from 324 AD to 1099 AD. After the Roman Empire officially split, Palestine became part of the Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, with its capital in Constantinople. This transition, beginning formally around 324 AD with Emperor Constantine's embrace of Christianity, had profound consequences for the region. Palestine, as the Holy Land, gained immense religious significance for Christians. Constantine and his mother, Helena, initiated ambitious church-building programs at sites associated with the life of Jesus, such as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem and the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. This imperial patronage led to a significant increase in Christian pilgrimage and the growth of monastic communities throughout the land. Under Byzantine rule, Palestine experienced a period of relative prosperity and demographic growth, particularly among its Christian population. The administration largely followed Roman patterns, though Greek became the dominant language of governance and culture. However, the Jewish population, though diminished after the earlier revolts, persisted, albeit with restricted rights and periodic persecution. Samaritans, another distinct religious group, also inhabited the region and occasionally rose in rebellion against Byzantine authority. The overall societal fabric was becoming increasingly Christianized, with bishops and monastic orders wielding considerable influence. The landscape became dotted with churches, monasteries, and hospices catering to pilgrims and the local Christian faithful. The established order of Byzantine Palestine was dramatically altered by the rise of Islam and the subsequent Arab conquests in the 7th century. In 638 AD, Muslim Arab armies, led by Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, conquered Jerusalem after a relatively peaceful siege. The terms of surrender, known as the Covenant of Umar, guaranteed the safety of the Christian inhabitants and their holy sites. Palestine was integrated into the rapidly expanding Islamic Caliphate, first under the Rashidun caliphs, then the Umayyads based in Damascus, and later the Abbasids centered in Baghdad. This marked a pivotal shift in the region's history, introducing Arabic as the language of administration and Islam as a major religious and cultural force. The early Islamic period in Palestine was generally characterized by religious tolerance, particularly towards Christians and Jews, who were considered people of the book and granted protected status. While non-Muslims were required to pay a special poll tax, they were allowed to practice their religions and maintain their communal institutions. Jerusalem, revered in Islam as the site of Prophet Muhammad's night journey and ascension, saw the construction of iconic Islamic structures like the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Haram al-Sharif. Arabic gradually became the lingua franca, and over time a significant portion of the local population converted to Islam, shaping the demographic and cultural landscape that would endure for centuries. Section 6. Crusades, Ayyubids and Mamluks, spanning from the year 1099 to 1517. The relative stability of early Islamic rule in Palestine was, well, shattered by the arrival of the First Crusade from Western Europe at the close of the 11th century. Motivated by a complex mix of religious fervor, political ambition, and economic interests, the Crusaders sought to reclaim Jerusalem and the Holy Land from Muslim control. In 1099, after a brutal siege, they captured Jerusalem, massacring many of its Muslim and Jewish inhabitants. This marked the establishment of the Crusader states, most notably the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which extended its rule over significant parts of Palestine and the Levantine coast. The Crusaders imposed a feudal system and built formidable castles, remnants of which still dot the landscape. The Crusader presence in Palestine lasted for nearly 2 centuries, characterized by ongoing conflict with neighboring Muslim powers and internal struggles among the Crusader nobility. The local population, including Muslims, Eastern Christians, and Jews, lived under Frankish rule, often facing discrimination and economic exploitation. However, there was also some degree of cultural exchange and trade between the Franks and the local communities. The most significant challenge to Crusader dominance came from Salah al-Din al-Ayyubi, or Saladin, the Kurdish founder of the Ayyubid dynasty. In 1187, Saladin achieved a decisive victory over the Crusader forces at the Battle of Hattin and subsequently recaptured Jerusalem, an event celebrated throughout the Muslim world. Although Saladin recaptured Jerusalem, some Crusader states clung to coastal enclaves, and subsequent crusades attempted, with limited success, to re-establish Christian control. The Ayyubid dynasty, founded by Saladin, ruled over Palestine, Egypt, and Syria, ushering in a period of Islamic revival and reconstruction. They focused on strengthening fortifications, promoting Sunni Islam, and fostering trade and agriculture. Jerusalem, under Ayyubid rule, saw the restoration of Muslim holy sites and the return of its Muslim and Jewish populations. The Ayyubids, however, were eventually weakened by internal succession disputes, paving the way for a new power to emerge from within their own military ranks. In the mid-13th century, the Mamluks, a military caste of former slave soldiers, primarily of Turkic and Circassian origin, seized power in Egypt and soon extended their control over Palestine and Syria, defeating both the remaining Crusader strongholds and the advancing Mongol armies. The Mamluks decisively ended the Crusader presence in the Levant with the capture of Acre in 1291. Under Mamluk rule, which lasted until 1517, Palestine was an important province. The Mamluks were notable patrons of Islamic architecture, endowing Jerusalem, Hebron, and other cities with magnificent mosques, madrasas, or religious schools and public works. However, their rule was also marked by heavy taxation, internal power struggles, and occasional outbreaks of plague, which impacted the local population. Section 7. 4 centuries of Ottoman rule, from 1517 to 1917. In 1517, the Ottoman Sultan Selim I defeated the Mamluk forces at the Battle of Marj Dabik and subsequently at Ridania, incorporating Palestine, along with Syria and Egypt, into the burgeoning Ottoman Empire. This momentous event marked the beginning of 4 centuries of Ottoman administration, a period that would profoundly shape the region's social, economic, and political landscape until the early 20th century. The Ottomans, a Turkish dynasty with origins in Anatolia, brought a new system of governance and a renewed emphasis on Sunni Islam. For the inhabitants of Palestine, this transition meant integration into a vast, multi-ethnic empire centered in Constantinople, now known as Istanbul. The Ottoman administration divided Palestine into several districts, or sanjaks, which were usually part of larger provinces or vilayets, such as the Vilayet of Syria, or, later, the independent Mutasarrifate of Jerusalem. Local governance was often managed through a combination of Ottoman officials and local notables, drawn from established Palestinian families. The early centuries of Ottoman rule generally brought a degree of stability and order, facilitating trade and pilgrimage. Jerusalem, Hebron, Nablus, and Gaza were important urban centers, each with its distinct economic activities and social structures. The empire invested in infrastructure, including roads, caravanserais, and fortifications, such as the impressive walls of Jerusalem rebuilt by Sultan Sulayman the Magnificent in the mid-16th century. Palestinian society during the Ottoman era was diverse, comprising a majority Muslim Arab population, both urban and rural, as well as significant Christian Arab communities of various denominations, and a smaller, though historically continuous Jewish population. These communities generally coexisted, each maintaining its religious institutions and cultural traditions under the Ottoman millet system, which granted non-Muslim religious groups a degree of autonomy in their personal status and communal affairs. Agriculture remained the backbone of the economy, with peasants, or fellaheen, cultivating grains, olives, fruits and vegetables. Urban life revolved around crafts, local trade and religious scholarship, with cities serving as administrative and commercial hubs for their surrounding rural hinterlands. By the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire, often termed the sick man of Europe, faced increasing internal challenges and external pressures from rising European powers. Reforms known as the Tanzimat were introduced, aiming to modernize the empire's administration, military and legal systems. These reforms had mixed effects in Palestine, leading to changes in land tenure laws such as the Ottoman Land Code of 1858, which had long-term consequences for land ownership patterns. European influence grew, with various powers establishing consulates, religious missions, and commercial enterprises. Simultaneously, early Zionist aspirations began to emerge in Europe, and small-scale Jewish immigration to Palestine commenced, setting the stage for future conflicts over land and identity as Ottoman authority waned. Section 8. The British Mandate and Growing Strife from 1917 to 1948. The dynamics of Palestine were irrevocably altered during World War I. The Ottoman Empire sided with the Central Powers, and in 1917, British forces advancing from Egypt defeated the Ottomans and occupied Palestine. This military victory coincided with a significant political development, the issuance of the Balfour Declaration by the British government in November 1917. This declaration expressed British support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, while also stipulating that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. This inherently contradictory statement laid the groundwork for decades of conflict, as it sought to reconcile competing nationalist aspirations within the same territory. Following the war, the newly formed League of Nations officially granted Great Britain the Mandate for Palestine in 1920, which came into effect in 1923. The mandate system was ostensibly designed to guide former Ottoman territories towards self-governance, but in Palestine, its terms incorporated the Balfour Declaration, obligating the British administration to facilitate Jewish immigration and settlement. This policy was met with strong opposition from the indigenous Arab Palestinian population, who constituted the vast majority and feared dispossession and the loss of their homeland. The British Mandate period was thus characterized by escalating tensions, political mobilization by both Arab and Jewish communities, and recurrent outbreaks of violence. Throughout the Mandate years, Jewish immigration, actively promoted by Zionist organizations, increased significantly, particularly during the 1930s as Jews fled persecution in Europe. This demographic shift, coupled with land purchases by Jewish agencies, heightened Palestinian Arab anxieties and fueled resistance. Palestinian Arabs organized politically, demanding independence and an end to Jewish immigration and land acquisition. Major Arab revolts occurred, most notably the Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939, which was a widespread popular uprising against British policies and Zionist settlement. The British authorities responded with harsh repressive measures, including mass arrests, house demolitions, and the deployment of significant military forces, further embittering the Palestinian population. As tensions mounted, Zionist groups, meanwhile, were systematically building the institutions of a future state, including political bodies, educational systems, economic enterprises, and paramilitary organizations like the Haganah. The British, caught between their conflicting promises and the escalating violence, struggled to maintain control. Various commissions of inquiry and partition proposals were put forth, but none succeeded in resolving the fundamental conflict. By the end of World War II, the situation in Palestine was highly volatile. Britain, weakened by the war and unable to find a viable solution, decided to relinquish its mandate and referred the question of Palestine to the newly formed United Nations, setting the stage for a momentous and tragic turning point. Section 9. The Nakba and the Dawn of a New Conflict, from 1948 to 1967. In 1947, the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, or UNSCOP, recommended the partition of Palestine into separate Arab and Jewish states, with Jerusalem to be placed under international administration. This proposal, embodied in UN General Assembly Resolution 181, was accepted by Jewish leaders, who saw it as a basis for establishing their state. However, it was overwhelmingly rejected by Palestinian Arab leaders and neighboring Arab states, who viewed it as unjust, as it allocated a majority of the land, 56%, to the proposed Jewish state, even though Jews constituted about 1/3 of the population and owned less than 7% of the land. The rejection set the stage for an inevitable confrontation. As Britain prepared to terminate its mandate, violence escalated sharply between Jewish militias and Palestinian Arab forces, with an undeclared civil war raging in the months leading up to May 1948. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. The following day, British forces officially withdrew, and armies from neighboring Arab states, including Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, intervened, marking the beginning of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. The newly formed Israeli forces, better organized and equipped than often portrayed, managed to not only defend the areas allotted to them by the UN plan, but also to expand their territory significantly beyond those boundaries. For Palestinians, 1948 marks the Nakba, or catastrophe. During the war and the preceding months, approximately 750,000 Palestinian Arabs, more than half of the indigenous Arab population, were forcibly expelled or fled from their homes in the territory that became Israel. Zionist militias carried out numerous operations that led to the depopulation and subsequent destruction of over 500 Palestinian villages and urban neighborhoods. Documented massacres occurred in several locations, instilling fear and hastening the exodus. These displaced Palestinians became refugees, scattered in the West Bank, then annexed by Jordan, the Gaza Strip, administered by Egypt, and neighboring Arab countries, where most of their descendants remain refugees to this day, denied the right to return to their homes and properties. The 1948 war concluded with a series of armistice agreements, signed in 1949 between Israel and the neighboring Arab states. These agreements established de facto borders, known as the Green Line, which left Israel in control of about 78% of Mandate Palestine. The remaining 22% was divided between the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, which came under Jordanian control, and the Gaza Strip, administered by Egypt. No Palestinian state was created. The following years were marked by profound trauma and displacement for Palestinians, while Israel focused on state-building and absorbing Jewish immigrants. Tensions remained high with frequent cross-border raids and Israeli reprisals. The unresolved Palestinian refugee crisis, coupled with ongoing regional instability, culminated in the 1967 Six-Day War, when Israel occupied the West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, and Syria's Golan Heights, ushering in a new era of occupation and conflict.